were two different kinds of conversations he had. There were conversations he had with people who were extremely malnourished, near starvation. They were sickly in many ways, but despite that, they continued to thrive. There were others who had perhaps come into the camp more recently. They were not yet nearing starvation. They were in reasonably good health compared to everyone else in the camp. But they would simply give up, go over and sit down someplace and die. He began to say, what's the difference between those two groups of people? And as he began to examine that, what he recognized after a while was that those who thrived despite the unthinkable scenarios they were in were people who had a purpose in their existence. They had a reason to survive. There was something of value out there beyond the prison camp that they wanted to attain, and the desire was so strong that it drove them to do whatever they could, to muster whatever energy they could, to pull together whatever resources they could in order to survive this ordeal. As Frankl observed that, his mind went back to a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, a 19th century German philosopher, who said, if you give a man a why, he can survive unthinkable hows. If you give a man a why, he can survive unthinkable hows. Now, in this case, the unthinkable how was surviving this prison camp. And the why was that thing they valued that gave them a sense of purpose and a determination to continue to muster whatever they needed to muster to achieve that thing that they aspired to. Now, after I finished reading that book the first time, again when I was 16, I never could have imagined that within about 10 years, I would be sitting face to face with people who had found in their ordeal that why. You see, when the Vietnam War was over, I was part of the intelligence detail that debriefed naval prisoners coming home from to the United States. I had been in training for that assignment for 2 years. As soon as the peace treaty was signed in Paris, the phone rang and it was the Pentagon calling me back to active duty. And I was part of a team of debriefers who worked with 7 POWs who came to the same hospital in order to receive treatment. Our job was to get their story while it was fresh in their mind. And so we actually housed ourselves in an office that was adjacent to their suite in the hospital. And at all hours of the night, if they were awake and wanted to debrief, we would visit with them. Most of these men, all but one, had been held 6, 7, in one case, 8.5 years as prisoners. This meant they went down very early in the war when the abuse was at its worst. The prisoners who fell into captivity in that period of time went through brutal treatment, not just occasionally, but as a matter of routine. One of these men that we debriefed had his extremities tied tight with ropes and was kept restrained that way so long that he no longer had any movement in his fingers. He could move a thumb and the opposing forefinger, but other than that, his hands were useless. At that point, they let up on the torture. And eventually he recovered full use of his extremities. But another man was forced to kneel on a concrete block for days and refused the right to sleep. When he would doze off, the guards would beat him with fan belts that came off of an automobile or a tractor. They would beat him with those fan belts until he woke back up, but they would leave him kneeling there. And he stayed there until his mind went so berserk for lack of sleep that he became like a madman. Still another man among those we debriefed was locked in iron stocks on his feet for 4 months. Much of that time, his hands were tied behind his back. And with some regularity, they would tie a rope around his wrists, run it over a ceiling joist above his head, pull it tight so that his arms were pulled up and his head was forced forward so that his head was actually between his knees. Now, when you sit and talk to men with stories like this, the question always comes to mind, how did you cope with that? How were you able to do that? And every one of them immediately and with no reflection whatsoever gave us the reason they had to do it. They, like those survivors in Frankel's camp, had found the why that allowed them to muster the how. The values are what steer us when vision is inadequate or even non-existent. Because you see, none of those prisoners in Frankel's camp had any vision of what it would be like to be liberated. They weren't even sure that it would happen. But if it were to happen, they wanted to be ready. Those prisoners in Hanoi had no vision of what it would be like to be freed. They dreamed of it, but they were afraid to hope too much for it. And yet, without a vision of what lay ahead for them, their values allowed them to continue to resist and to be resourceful in their resilience. What these stories tell us is that no matter how powerless our situation, no force on earth can take away our values. When we have nothing else left, our values continue to shape us. And if that's true of us as individuals, it's true of us collectively as companies. As a result, we need to think of our lives as an expression of our deepest values and the principles we derive from them. And organizational leadership needs to think about their values the same way, as an expression of our deepest values and the principles that we derive from them. Organizational values ought to be formative. They ought to shape the way we do things. But unfortunately, all too many times, corporate values are only espoused values. They are printed on placards in the workspace. They're prominently displayed on a web page. But when it comes to how the company actually functions and operates, the values that are guiding that part of the life of the company are really some kind of default value that has come into existence of its own accord. No one sat down and created this set of values. No one espoused them or advocated for them. They simply evolved over time because leadership failed to adequately embed the values they espoused in the lifeblood of the organization. One of the things that sets pace-setting organizations apart from ordinary run-of-the-mill organizations elsewhere is that in pace-setting organizations, they don't give just lip service to their values. Everyone knows the critical values in that company, from the C-suite down to those who are doing the most menial tasks in the company. And so seeing the power of values, I began to urge my clients to focus first on and foremost on values, and then delineate their vision and mission afterward. Those companies that couldn't get to a value, get to a vision because their world was changing so fast, nonetheless could delineate their core values and let those be the guardrails that kept them on course. What I discovered that if they did that, they were going to have much of the success they would have had were they able to define a clear, concise vision that they were moving toward. Now, when we shifted that emphasis in my organization, in my firm, to focusing on values first and then vision, we were actually borrowing a page from a well-tested example. The example of Bill Hewitt and David Packard. They are the two men who gave us the Hewlett-Packard Company. They began that company in 1938, January 1st. But they spent the Christmas holidays just before that launch enlarging their sense of the company they wanted to build. They delineated the values they wanted to be part of that company, the kind of culture they wanted, the kind of atmosphere they wanted. This at a time when they were not even sure what products they were going to produce. They didn't set out with a vision statement. They didn't set out with a mission statement. They set out, first of all, to define what kind of company are we wanting to build. And then these other things would follow in due time, aligned with those things that they spent time in that garage defining. The document that they developed became known as the Hewlett-Packard Way. And for decades, it was the orchestrating ideology of that company. Values first, vision follows. Values first, then vision. When I launched my company, Strategic Leadership Development International, in 2001, I was living not very far from HP, and I knew a number of executives who were part of the Hewlett-Packard world. And borrowing somewhat from their inspiration, I made my firm a values-first firm in the way that we would help people define what they wanted to be as a company. But almost immediately, I ran into a problem. I was asked by a friend to come in and help his company recover from a point that had them high-centered. He was CEO of a 5-year-old company that built high-end resorts that catered to the very wealthiest families in locations all around the globe. There were 2 other men who had joined him in this enterprise. The 3 of them had been senior executives at a prominent international company, and they went out together to build this company, being very principled themselves. And as a result, trying to construct a company that was very ethical at its core. But now, operating on 5 continents, with the need to hire a lot of talent from local communities where their resorts were, their management ranks were beginning to be filled with people who were not bringing their values to the company. And ethically speaking, the wheels were starting to come off because they had never taken the time to document the values in a way that they could be easily disseminated through the organization. So what he wanted me to do was to help them redefine who they wanted to be as a company. And I met with about 20 of their top executives. And we started the day with me standing at the head of a table with 4 flip charts. And using my values first approach, I said, we want to begin by identifying your core values. And we want to shoot for 5 to 7, 7 at most. Try to get it down to 5. Now you say, why 5 to 7? Well, the purpose of values, among other things, is to be easily communicated at every layer and in every nook and cranny of your organization, so that everyone understands what the uniting values are that hold us together. What are the guardrails that we operate within? But if we have more than 5 to 7 values, that's very difficult to communicate. And so I said, we want to get this number down to 5 or 7, but before we do that, just start suggesting to me things that you see as being core values of this company. They jumped right in. They started throwing out ideas right and left. I'm writing furiously, and in no time at all, I have 2 flip charts filled with possible values to include in our value statement. 35 in all. Well, obviously, we can't go out with 35 values. I had already had an experience just a short while before with another client who didn't understand that you need to limit the values that you promote within your organization. As I walked into their corporate offices, to my right, I immediately noticed a placard that had their core values on it, and there were 14 of them. I thought, 14 values. I made note of a few of them and went on into the meeting with their executive team. And at an opportune moment in our conversation, I decided to field a question to address a suspicion I had. I suspected that those placarded values there by the entrance were what we would today call virtue signaling. They were sending a signal that they were a values-driven company. But I rather suspected that those were not the values that were really running the company. And so I said to them in the course of the conversation, one of the things that really impresses me about your company is that you have your values posted right there near the entrance. And I was in a hurry coming in, so I could only notice 2 or 3 of them, and those were, and I cited them, and I said, now what are the rest of them? Remind me of some of the others. And the room went deadly silent. After 20 to 30 seconds of silence, the CEO finally spoke up and mentioned 2 of them. Another person spoke up and offered 1. A third person spoke up and offered 1. But then silence everywhere. And I just let it run for a while. And then I leaned forward and I said, so you, as the executive leadership of this company, cannot name your core values. If you can't name them, how many of them can your workers on the floor name? The CEO sort of blushed and he said, what you're saying is they're a waste, aren't they? I laughed and I said, those are your words, but it's perhaps an accurate description of the reality. So, having had that experience, I wanted to be sure that we got our values down from 35 to a realistic number. And we pretty quickly were able to eliminate about half of them. They really weren't core values. Then we found ourselves moving on to combining some values together and chunking them up into a larger value. We found ourselves arguing back and forth about how to word things. And through squeezing and pushing and some bloodletting, we finally got down to 7 values. But I wasn't really happy about the methodology that we had used. To my chagrin, the same thing happened with another group and another group in the weeks that came. Here I had been so confident of using a values-first approach that I had not anticipated the pushback that it was going to create, because it was so difficult to come to a consensus on the 7 core values. And then a couple of years later, and of all places, Kigali, Rwanda, I found out what I had been doing wrong. I had gone to Rwanda, had opened actually a subsidiary of my company there to train government and business leaders in leadership in the wake of the genocide to help them rebuild their country. I was doing a 3-day training for the governors of all the counties in Rwanda. And because these men had rather elementary English skills, I was going out of my way to simplify every concept as much as I could and to be sure that I defined every term so that they fully understood it. And in the middle of that, it suddenly dawned on me what I had been doing wrong in that facilitation back in the U.S. We had said, as we began to build those 35 values, that we were defining our core values. We were treating all values as though they were on an equal plane. But as a matter of fact, many of the things that we were listing as core values were not really core values. You see, a core value ought to be one that is constant. It is going to continue and prevail. It's going to be something we are committed to, no matter what product line we may choose, no matter what changes in the industry we have to respond to by going through a major reconfiguration. Those values are going to remain constant. That's the Hewlett-Packard way. Here are the values. No matter how the high-tech world evolves, we will hold to these principles and values. Suddenly, as I was talking to those governors, it dawned on me that we shouldn't think of values as one cluster as part of our framework of our vision and mission. Instead, we need to see values as falling into 3 groups. One group, and the most important, are the core values. Let's identify them. Let's be clear as to the things from a value standpoint that are non-negotiable in our organization. With those values defined, now we write our vision statement. Because if the core values are really core values, the vision statement ought to conform with those values. But once we write a great vision statement, implementing it, carrying it to fulfillment, is going to perhaps require elevating some values that are not core values, but they are essential for us to accomplish this vision. So now we start identifying those values, and they become our strategic values. They are the values that are going to position us to achieve our vision. With the vision and the strategic values now defined, it's now time to write our mission statement. A vision statement should look ahead into the indefinite future. I usually talk 7 to 10 years out and describe a desired outcome that we want at that distant point. And having defined that, we then start thinking about the strategies to get us there. Those strategies then create a need for a mission statement to carry out in the near term things that will advance us toward the fulfillment of that vision. Think of it this way. As a retired Navy officer, I think of these things often in military terms. In the Second World War, we had a grand strategy of a vision, if you would, of the Allied forces squeezing Hitler from the West and Russian forces squeezing him from the East. That would be the way that we would defeat the Germans. But as that grand strategy was carried out, as that vision was being accomplished, every major campaign had a mission that it carried out in order to advance the vision. So that's the way we think about vision and mission. So we write our mission statement of what we're going to be doing in the foreseeable and immediate future in order to advance the ultimate vision, the ultimate thing that we want to attain. When we outline that mission and start looking at what it will take to achieve it, we're likely to see other values that are important, essential to carrying out that mission that are not part of our strategic values or our core values. So now that what we have is a 5-element framework. At the top are our core values, and then we have our vision. Then we have the strategic values that are derived from that vision, then our mission, and then the operational values that are derived from that mission. That's the scheme that I've been using now for the last 10 to 12 years, dating back to that eye-opening experience in Rwanda. As we look at that, there is an advantage to having values clustered in 3 groups. Now, we end up with more than 5 to 7 values. We may have 5, 6, or 7 core values, 3 or 4 strategic values, 3 or 4 operational values. So we seem to be violating our 5 to 7 rule, but now we've got them in clusters that we can communicate according to the appropriate setting. If we're in a setting where we're talking about strategy, we emphasize the strategic values. If we're in a setting in which we're talking about our mission and our operations, we emphasize operational values. In our broad publications, on our website, and our public-facing statements, we emphasize our core values. But they are all there systemically related to one another and supporting one another. Because not only do many organizations have too many values, they have not aligned their vision and mission statements with their core values in such a way that they all flow one to the next to the next. In this case, that integration of your orchestrating ideology in a way that there is a natural flow from your core values to your vision, to your strategic values, to your mission, to your operating values is a powerful, powerful learning tool. It's a powerful, powerful organizing tool. It is the way that top performing organizations approach what they are doing. They may not use these categories, but everyone I've studied has understood the importance of having contingent values, strategic and operational values that may change as vision and mission change, but at the top are anchored core values that are who we are no matter what. Those values are so important that even when vision begins to fail us, our core values can still steer us forward. If you've been standing on your head, you can get back on your feet now. Take what I've suggested and look at your own organization. Does it have a clear statement of values? Are they really core values, or are they an admixture of strategic and operational values? Take this assignment seriously, because I can tell you, when you really begin to focus on the difference values can make, it opens up unbelievable new perspectives on what you need to be about and where your priorities need to be. I thank you for your attention.
Wow.
We're going to open the floor now for some questions, and I'll be glad
Wow.
to field them.
Wow. I'm amazed. I'm amazed. Listen, I got so many questions. So you guys, I know everybody should have something to say on this. Mike, this is awesome. I want to know how, let's see, what's percentage wise, like companies that do not even address the values, because I know a lot of small business people
Uh-huh,
that
uh-huh.
they don't address any of this stuff. They're about how much money we made, and that's it. That's the main focus.
That's right.
This value thing that you just laid out so eloquently, it seems to me the way you put it, it is not just important. It is a necessity for
Uh-huh.
success. And if you don't do this, put the values down in your company, lay these values out that everybody adheres to. This is a company value system that you set up for failure.
You have set up what I call a de facto value system, one that just evolves from the various opinions that everybody brings in from their own background and their own experience. And right now, as we are integrating unprecedented numbers of immigrants from 200 nations around the world into our business life, they are all bringing a different perspective on values and even how you should treat people in a working environment from what most of us assume is the best way to do it. And if we are not purposefully orienting people to our values, these default values will take over and push the values that we are really interested in aside.
Wow. From a C-suite point of view, outlook, you deal with huge companies, Mike. You deal with
Right.
these big companies. The way you just described this, without that formula you just described, those big companies are are like they're running amok. there's no structure there because I can't, if I have no values in a company like that, a huge company like that, then I don't know what's going on
Right.
with under me. The people are just doing whatever. So man, that is awesome, man. And I was always under the impression that we needed a vision statement first. We got to have a vision and a mission statement, and you just just turned that thing around. So we need value before the vision.
Right.
Wow.
Because the vision must conform with the core values.
Mm-hmm.
If they are core values, the vision has to align with them. Otherwise, they're not core values. Everything has to be answerable to the core values, including the vision itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. That's deep. Anybody got a question? Anybody got a question? Somebody got a question there, man. If not, I got plenty of questions, man. You said that this is just something blew my mind again. If you give a man a why, he can survive unthinkable hows. Let me ask you this. Is the why the value?
The why is not necessarily a value, but it is something that is very valuable to us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, for instance, for Frankel had been writing a new book outlining a completely new approach to psychiatry. He lived in Vienna, where he was a good friend with Sigmund Freud and with Adler and other preeminent psychiatrists of his day. And he had developed his own approach to psychiatry, and he had written this book. And when the Germans rounded him up, he carried that book with him.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as the Germans saw it, they threw it in the fire. So his why was to write that book once he was out of this prison camp. That wasn't a value, except that it spoke to the fact that he thought that what he had was so important for the world to hear that it was a value in that sense of the word. So you're correct. It's not necessarily a value, but it's somehow linked to a value, or it would not be motivational, because values are what motivate us.
Right. Right. Wow, this is awesome stuff. I got some questions here in the chat, but go ahead, Tony. I see your hand up. You got to unmute.
Recording stopped.
You got to unmute. You muted, Tony. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm here.
We hear you.
Now, okay. I'm hearing you, Mike, about the order of in which you lined it up. But now, if God give you a vision and you ask God to order your steps, a good man's steps are ordered by the Lord. What
You're breaking up.
a lot of things when it comes, does that change a lot of things when people you put God first, and that's the core, and you know that and whatever. But if God, he promised that his word should not come back void. It's going to do that when she's. I'm just wondering if you got somebody like, say me, for instance, what kind of advice would you give me?
Well, one of the things, and Tony, I will preface this by saying that you were really breaking up badly, and I think I've spliced together the words I heard to make sense of what you were trying to communicate.
Right.
One of the things we have to be careful about is not equating the word vision in Scripture with vision in management. Those are two different kinds of vision. One is a revelation. The other is an aspiration. In business, our vision is what we aspire to do. In vision, in Scripture, is something that comes from outside of us, and many times it may carry with it a demand on us that we don't necessarily aspire to. Look at all the prophets who said, "Not me, choose him." They were not too crazy about the vision they had
But now,
seen.
what if you inspired to it? What if you inspired to it?
What's that?
I'm inspiring to what God's will.
I know you are, but in a business context where I'm running a secular company, that's not the kind of vision that I can articulate unless it's a Christian vision, a Christian company, or a Christian nonprofit, a Christian college. There you can talk about the meaning that God has in your life and how that colors and contours the work that you're doing from a management and leadership standpoint. But the remarks that I just made were aimed at an audience that's entirely secular, that has that will turn me off as soon as I start trying to make biblical applications to their business.
Got you. That's a question I'll ask you later on tonight.
That's really good, man. That's really good. Hey, man, listen, I know this thing about these values, and you gave the Hewlett Packard way. I said, wow. You said a core values needs to be constant. Yeah, we can't have one value to these values today, and and then tomorrow we got something else going on, or next week there's something else going.
Yeah, that can happen with operational values. It can happen with strategic values. They may change. As our vision changes, the strategic values may change. As our mode of operations or our scale of operations changes, we may have to change some of our operational values. So there's room for fluid movement within those values, but at the level of core values, they are there constantly. I ran out of time, or I would have told a story about a CEO who was a very close associate of mine for many years, and he led one of the largest commercial real estate companies in the world that had made its fortune primarily building huge warehouse complexes near logistic centers on several continents. In 1990, he and I were having breakfast one morning, and he asked me the question, "What do you know about just-in-time delivery systems?" And I said, well, I'm not really heavily schooled on them, but from what I'm reading about them, I think they're very promising. There's still some problems with them, but some very smart people are working on solving those problems. So I believe they've got a promising future. And he said, I was afraid that's what he would respond with. But let me tell you what that says to me. I've got to ask, what does just-in-time delivery systems do to a company whose cash flow comes from warehouse districts? We won't be needed in 10 years. And then he added, I was going to retire in about a year, but I think I just put off my retirement 5 years because I've got to completely recontour this business. Well, I watched him over the next few years do it. Over the next few years, he got them completely out of warehousing into a completely different arena of commercial real estate. But that new company with that whole new identity and mission still had the same core values that he had to begin with. No matter how much you change, your core values are core values.
Mm-hmm.
They are your non-negotiables.
Wow. I love this stuff, man. Karen, I see your hand is up, and I got a question in the chat. We might not be able to get to all of them, but come on, Karen.
It is such good stuff. I was taking a zillion notes. I love it. I love this stuff. Anyway, I totally am on board with the values comes first, and the vision. My question, in that same vein, is how I wrote this question down. How can leaders recognize when it's time to adjust the vision? Because we started with the value, and we came up with the vision after, right? So how could, as leaders, we recognize when it's time to adjust the vision instead of without compromising the company's values?
Okay. All right. That's a good question. And in today's world, that question is more and more relevant because the competitive business place is changing so quickly that you can have a vision that we're going to build such and such a product in 6 years, and 3 years from now, there's no market for that product. So your vision now has to be updated. It's basically a challenge of staying abreast of what the trends are in your industry or in your field of specialization, And where do the leading thinkers see that going in 3 to 4 years? And if they are right, like my friend asking about just-in-time delivery, if they are right and we stay on our present trajectory, will we be relevant to that world that is emerging that we're going to need to compete in 3 or 4 years? If my answer is I'm not sure, then it's time to start rethinking my vision and doing the research to find out what can I envision for that world that I do have confidence in, so that we can bring unhesitating and total commitment to pursuing that vision.
Thank you
Make
so
sense?
much. You got it. Okay, all right. Thank you for that, Mike. We have time for one more question before we have to go. Don't go nowhere. We do have another show after this one, and you guys that we can't get your answers to your questions. Come on back next week. I think we're gonna have Mike back again. So you guys, come on back, man. We'll get your questions in and get your questions answered. Let me answer. Let me see. That's 3 questions. I'm gonna ask. I see Superior M&A LLC had this question, and it says, should I have these core values posted on the wall to keep it relevant to all employees' minds? Or how should I keep these values relevant?
Posting them is one good way. They certainly should be on a website someplace if you've got a website. One of the best ways to keep values before people is to make a point of looking for people who embody or exemplify a value in an exceptional way in something that they do. And then commending them, sometimes even in the face, maybe it's privately, maybe it's before others who would hear the commendation, commend them for pursuing that value. Let me give you an example. Dr. Norval Young, the chancellor of Pepperdine University when I was dean of students there, was the most powerful motivator I've ever known. And one of the ways he did it, and I was the recipient of this blessing more than once, I would be headed to my car on the parking lot at the end of the workday. He would see me, call to me. I would go over to him and he would say, Mike, I've learned that you did such and such and such and such last week. Let me tell you, that's the very sort of thing we've got to do more of and do it consistently if we are ever going to achieve. And he would go to the vision statement and quote a phrase out of the vision statement, or go to the mission statement and quote a phrase out of the mission statement, or go to the core values and quote one of the core values. He tied what you were doing always back to one of those 3 things, so that you felt like, wow, I did something significant. But anyone who heard that commendation had a reminder that those are the things we're looking for by way of performance from our people. So that to me is far more effective than just a placard, because after we've seen the placard 2 or 3 times, we won't notice it any longer. But we will remember the compliments that tied our performance to one of those critical values or our vision or mission.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mike, man. You are always awesome, man. You are full of information and educational values that you gave us tonight. And these are things that I'm definitely going to hold on to. There's other questions, Mike. We're gonna have to get those back to you, man, and get you to answer some of these questions that are pouring in now on the next show or show after that, or we got to get these questions answered. But I want to thank my audience. I want to thank the panel tonight and all you guys listening. I want to thank all you guys. You guys are awesome. I love you guys, man. Keep coming, man. Let your voice be heard. Talk radio. It's your boy now.
Yeah. Step in, lean in, Mike gone. and begin. Hey! Been quiet too long, chewed up tongue, turned down songs, clock keeps ticking on the wall. But your name's still missing from the roll call. Let your voice be heard, say every single word, from the low notes to the sky. Throw hands up high. Let your voice be heard, loud, clear, undeterred. If it shakes the room, that's how you know it's you. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You got a truth tucked deep in your chest, heartbeat tapping out, say it, confess. Crowd might stare, let them do what they do. They never held a fire living in you. Let your voice be heard, say every single word, from the low notes to the sky. Throw hands up high. Let your voice be heard, loud, clear, undeterred. If it shakes the room, that's how you know it's you. Yeah. Speak up, name your dream out loud. Stand up, you're the leader of this crowd. One spark, one shout, watch the silence melt. That power in your mouth is the truest thing you felt. Let your voice be heard, say every single word, from the low notes to the sky. Throw your hands up high. Let your voice be heard, loud, clear, undeterred. If it shakes the room, that's how you know it's you. Yeah, that's you. That's you. Step in, lean in, mic off, never again. Step in, lean in, mic.